I'm Lonnie Webb, and this is On Comics. All right, this is On Comics, and I am the ever-loving Lonnie Webb. And with me today, let me push that button, is our Brexit Insider. We're going to talk about, I wish I could push the right button. There we go. And today we are going to be talking about Brexit, your questions, your answers. Please pop into the chat with a question if you have it. John White, I have for today, this is the first time I think I am appearing without my red hat. I got my hair cut.
Lonnie, what did you do? Where's your hat?
I took it off.
And the good lady's not going to come and drag you off the screen, is she?
If my wife sees me like this, she will assume I'm her boyfriend, and not actually her husband because I look so much better.
Oh well, there you go, I suppose. But hey, sans hat with a hat, it's still you. And hello, and nice to be with you, and nice to be on Comics again. So today we're doing something a little bit different. We're not talking about.
Yes, we are. We're definitely veering. We're away from comics. We're away from Doctor Who. We are away from pop culture. We are talking about. Well, rather than not really politics, but government.
Politics, government, sovereignty, as real as it gets. And we've been enjoying chatting, recently, and the Noel Clarke thing is going absolutely great. By the way, he's getting more and more support every day. But this is not about any of that, because Brexit remains a very divisive topic in British society. The fault lines which were set by the referendum are still very much in place, and there's a big chunk of the population who is still very upset about it 6 years later. So it is an issue with a certain amount of sensitivity, because I couldn't take a group of British people who come together against any issue and talk about Brexit without dividing them, because some will agree with it and some won't. And I don't want to do that in other contexts. But because I am a very serious veteran of actually making Brexit happen, I think your listeners, especially American patriots and social conservatives, will be quite interested to hear my story of how hard the little guy could fight for freedom, because that's what this was all about. So, but to start with, we've got to try to define what the hell was it anyway? Because I'm sure there's people who don't really understand it that well.
That's a key thing here in America. It just suddenly popped up, and I remember when it happened. I thought, wait a minute, are the Scots taking over? I am.
It did have a go in 2014, but the vote did not go their way. They're chomping for another one, but we will talk about Scotland as part of this for definite. But the first thing, your question there, where did Brexit come from? If you go and do a Google search, time limited to 2012, you won't find Brexit mentioned at all, because the phrase, the word, the term didn't even come into existence until 2013 and didn't start to be widely used until 2014. Before that, it was always the campaign for a second referendum on being part of what by then had developed into the EU. So, in a sense, Brexit was a hostile, the term itself was a hostile media rebranding because when they could rebrand a second referendum and give it a media term, then they could load all other sorts of meanings onto it, like if you support Brexit, you're racist. Which, oh my God, they played that card so hard. I mean, wanting to run your own country from within your own borders. I mean, how racist can you get, you white supremacist swines? So all of that invective was loaded into the term Brexit, and the term Brexit itself was not from within the movement for the European referendum. It was imposed by the media from outside. So if we're talking about Brexit, we're talking about a media creation, but nevertheless one that we took hold of, grasped by the neck, and made into something that we could win with. So, their little schemes did not come to all that much. But I've given you
When did it start?
It started the same day that we voted to join the European Economic Community back in 1975.
Oh my!
And
I was in Bavaria when the EU actually began to crystallize in the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, the EU as we know it today really didn't come into sight until the early 2000s in terms of it openly being a European superstate with the aspirations to effectively be like the USA but without the freedom.
That's true. They were going to leave everything the same with the bizarre money systems, and even though they're going to use a common currency,
very much
broken.
Very socialist, very top-down, imposed, authoritarian government dictate. Yeah, very much the sort of creature that what the EU developed into became. And I've given you a couple of links which are kind of a bit heavy, but I want to start with the meat, and I'm going to actually give people a proper context for the history. And then we'll get a bit more loose and talk a bit more generally and have some fun. And we've got some memes to come up and stuff and everything. So we've got quite a nice package lined up. But can we start with that first one, the UK and EUAC.uk PDF link that I gave you?
PDF link is coming up. And
okay, so here we are. Now, this itself is biased. It's partisan, it's written from a certain perspective, and I'll point out that bias as we go through it. But nevertheless, it is generally useful as an accurate timeline. So we're starting off 6 years after World War II, and the very first origin of the EU was the European Coal and Steel Community. This was West Germany, because East Germany was under the USSR at the time. France, Italy, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands coming together to form a club of the ostensible purpose of boosting each other's relative trade in coal and steel. So yeah, the backbone of manufacturing. And this was the first origin of the first trade club. Nevertheless, if you go back and you study the people who were behind creating the ECSC, you will find that they were quite open in their writings and their books about their aspirations to form a giant European superstate. So the superstate aspirations of the EU were there all along. But what this is salami tactics. One slice at a time.
Oh, yes.
Yes, one slice at a time. Or if you want a different metaphor, slowly turning up the heat on the pan on the stove and boiling the frog. It's the same thing.
It is exactly the same thing.
Take one step, and if that holds, you take another step. Sometimes you take half a step backwards, but then it comes back with 2 more steps. But every single step is all progressing. And they had a vision for it to be a decades-long plan to achieve this. Every single step is all progressing step by step by step towards the final goal of a European superstate. So this was what this was all about. Now, look, as far as it goes, I want to make it clear, I'm not against the idea of the EU. Right? I mean, for Europe, continental Europe, especially for any country with a border with Germany, the idea of, at the very least, very close trade cooperation always made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe in trade because trade brings prosperity and prosperity brings peace.
I was
So if
always
you,
concerned that when the EU started to form, that really just became an extended Germany.
well, it's a fact. But if you go back and look at these characters who were involved in all of this at this time, you'll find that quite a few of them had been Heil Hitlering just a few years before. But then
Gotcha.
it's not that different with the Apollo missions and Operation Paperclip, and you lot nicking all those scientists to do your moon missions. You know, I mean, there was quite a bit of reappropriation of Nazi scientists and so forth.
Mm.
But yes, you know. The fact is that the ideals of a European superstate not that dissimilar to Mr. Hitler's ideas of a German European superstate.
Interesting.
You know, and of course, when it comes to the Nazis and their origin as, let's say it, socialists,
Yeah. Yeah.
what that was really about was let's do communism, but with Germans in charge instead of Russians. That's what it was all about. And then in the 1920s, the commies and the fascists had good old street battles all across the place, you know, and it was all this battle for who should be in charge of a revolution. Should it be the Germans or should it be the Russians? That's what it was all about. And you know, I mean, the origins of Antifa, the
Mm-hmm.
anti-fascist. I can't remember the second German name for them yet, but you know, I mean, what we see today, all this stuff was floating around 80 years ago. That's
Yeah.
how much what comes around goes around again. You know what I mean? But
Well, we had
it
it
was,
with President Wilson.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So continuing down this list a little bit, 1957. So after 6 years, it was time for the next little step. They brought in atomic energy by setting up the European Atomic Energy
Really?
Community. So then they had a grip on coal, steel, and
Nuclear.
nuclear power, and that was also when they formed the European Economic Community, which was all about trade. It was a trading group. It wasn't about government. It wasn't about sovereignty. No, 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 no. It's just so we can all be a bit more prosperous and trade with each other a bit more easily with fewer barriers. And this is very significant because it's the EEC that was originally sold to the British people when they originally voted yes in 1975. But we'll come to that a little bit further down the line. And this was, of course, with the Treaty of Rome,
Mm.
which was the foundational treaty of the modern EU. At the same time, in 1960, just like I was just saying, you know, should Germans be the lead communists or should Russians lead communists? In 1960, a rival body, the European Free Trade Organization, tried to form the blag up for themselves, and that was Austria, Denmark, Norway, Portugal, Sweden, Switzerland, and the UK. So that again was free trade, but deliberately avoiding the supernatural institutions, which even then it started to leak out what the Treaty of Rome was really about establishing. You see, so this was a bit of a diversionary tactic. And then in 1961, Britain asked if it could join the EEC, which is the European Economic Community, which of course is the superstate one. So we started off in the non-superstate one, then a year later tried to get into the superstate one, and then the French said no. And General Charles de Gaulle said, "I'm not having these roast beefs in our club." So he vetoed us, and it wasn't the only time he did it as well. And then in 1965, all of these existing bodies get merged into one called the European Communities. So no longer coal and steel separate from atomic power, separate from trade. It's all put in one basket together. 1967, we have another go at joining. And again, de Gaulle says, go away. We don't like you. So, you know, the old enmity between France and Britain, oh, where would we be without it? In 1968, a customs union is completed by those 6 original founder members, which means there's no import duties left between them all. So we've now got full free trade in that original core EU area. 1973, we try again, this time we succeed. We're allowed to join. So we join the EEC. Now, something that most British people don't know today is how absolutely disastrous that decision was for us economically. Oh, bless you. I mean, Britain in the 70s was sometimes called the poor man of Europe. You know, our economy was moribund. We were driven by unions and you know, general uncompetitiveness. You know, we were a very slow economy. We weren't doing very well, and this was all blamed on us and so forth. You know, it's the British. We're lazy. We don't really want to get on. All of this sort of stuff was being said. But the reality is, but when we joined the EEC, in order to do so, we had to sacrifice all of our trade agreements with all of the Commonwealth countries. So we were thoroughly deceived by our political leadership. You're going to hear that's a very consistent theme when it comes to Brexit. And you know, we were told this was going to be great for us, and it's going to boost our economy and everything else, but nobody even talked about the damage and the cost of cutting off our nose to spite our face by cutting off the rest of the world. And in fact, our decision to join the EEC caused an absolutely disastrous recession in New Zealand, but they didn't even recover from until the 80s because of the lamb. You know, we were the vast majority of their export market at preferential trade terms, and when we joined the EEC, that all stopped overnight. Their economy took an enormous hit because they lost their main trade partner. And of course, you know, we haven't really restored relations that well with New Zealand ever since, honestly. And I don't, who would blame them after being treated like that? But most British people today have no idea the damage we did to ourselves joining the EEC in the first place. And certainly the British electorate did not. Because, you know, especially back then, if it wasn't in the paper, it wasn't happening. So control of narratives in the press and on the television. I mean, we only had 3 channels in 1975. You know, I mean, and if they all sing the same song, BBC, BBC Two, ITV, you know, the poor public didn't have much chance to be properly informed about what was really going on. But nevertheless, having joined in 1973, in 1975, the British people had to put a stamp on it to go okay. Now, we were only told that this was about trade and it was going to be good for us and it was going to mean more money and we were all going to be better off. So surprise, surprise. And I remember this actually. I was 3 years old, but I remember this day because I remember being taken up the poll stations and my mum could vote and all the adults in the voting booths and so on. So I do remember this day this referendum was held. We voted to stay. We voted to stay in by a very decisive 7-3 margin. So you would think the whole issue was settled there and then, but that was not to be how it went. However, you can see that if you were somebody going, hang on, this EU, well, as it now is, but this EEC, it's all a bit dodgy, you know. Those voices could barely be heard. And if they were heard, would have been treated as somewhat crankish. Even so, they were solidly based in hard, provable, evidenced fact.
So here's a question from an American, because I wouldn't know. Who owns the papers in the UK?
Well, there are a couple of individuals who have quite a lot of power in the press. One of them is Murdoch. He's an Australian. But you know, I mean, wow, who owns the media? God, you know, I mean, how do you even begin to answer that now that we're in 2022 and everything's all sorts of shell companies and everything else? You know, the media has become.
Though.
In 1975, it would have been a few newspaper proprietors. It would have been a handful of people who could control what papers did and did not ultimately print. The owners.
So did
control the editors.
Did those handful work together to control the narrative?
Well, they clearly did. What their motive was is another question. Maybe they thought they were supporting the Prime Minister, maybe they thought it was better for trade and better for their investments in other industries, or maybe they were really into a European superstate. I mean, you'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. Maybe even the newspaper owners didn't really know what the EEC was ultimately about. Because unless you're going to go and find these books written in French and German and actually study what these people are saying and identify who the players are, you haven't got much chance to really know what the game plan is.
Gotcha.
So mostly we found out the hard way when it became increasingly impossible to deny what it was all about. 1979, first elections to the European Parliament, and the launch of the exchange rate mechanism, which was to prove an utter disaster 20 years later. Greece joins 1981. Of course, Maggie Thatcher gets into office in 1979 as well, which is the start of 13 years of very powerful, very strong right-wing government. And in 1984, Maggie famously handbagged the buggers in Brussels, which was how it was presented in our press, literally, that she handbagged them. Imagine her getting her handbag and beating them over the head, telling them, no. Either we pay less money or we're out. That's what she said, and they folded, and we just got our rebate, so that, yes, we had to pay for more of this money, but yes, we got some of it back. But that in itself became a weapon used against us later on. I'll explain that later.
Okay.
1981, Spain and Portugal getting bigger. 1985, Schengen Treaty, which is where we first sign of free movement without the need for a passport between member states. The UK does not join that. So you can see there's two ways already in which Britain has remained separate from the European Union, because the thing is, we have this power in the EU, but most of the countries in the EU don't. In that, when we were in it, we were paying for it. And there's only France, Germany, and England or Britain that paid for the EU. Everybody else was taking money out of the pot, not putting it in.
Okay.
So that did give us quite a bit of clout, and over all the time that we were in the EU, we tended to be seen as a force which was constantly trying to delay its progress.
As I recall, as the EU is warming up all through the 80s, the spoken word was, "We'll never raise an army." But in the Schengen Treaty, if I remember right, this one little line was worked in there. We're giving ourselves the power to raise a militia across all EU.
Well, look, it's like this. Does each state in the US have its own military, or do you have a federal government and a federal military for all of America?
Actually,
well, I know you've got National Guard, which is a bit different, yes. But I mean, in terms of the US military writ large, the guys who can actually launch nuclear missiles, that's a big federal institution, isn't it?
Yes. In Texas, we're a little different because our National Guard can pretty well hold their own against, we've got our own Air Force, but, Texas is different. But we don't have
definitely different. Even from England, I know that Texas is different. God bless Texas for it, Back to the EU. 86, Single European Act. So there's your aim for a single market completed by 1992. Now, and when we get to it, we get the Maastricht Treaty, creating the actual European Union. So it was at 1992 that the European Union was born as a political institution openly. All until then, it had all been justified as it was about trade. But now it was about government. Foundations for single currency, cooperation in foreign security policy. Again, there you go. You've got the origin starting of an EU army. But of course, the one thing which has held an EU army back is NATO. Because when you've got NATO, how do you justify needing a European army per se? So there's always been a little bit of toing and throwing over that, a bit of fancy footwork, But and of course, why pay for your own army when you've got America to pay for it?
Yeah.
I'm afraid so. I mean, Mr. Trump was very right about that. 1995, Austria, Finland, and Sweden join. Norway and Switzerland apply, but they have to withdraw because their people say no in referendums. 1997, Amsterdam Treaty, further developing security policy, starts a process developing employment and social protection policies. 1998, session talks opened with Cyprus, Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Poland, and Slovenia. Then you've got Romania, Slovakia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, and Malta. In other words, let's get in at the trough, boys. Free money.
Yes,
That's what it was.
That's what it's all about.
Rolling this back slightly, let's go back to 1992 and the Maastricht Treaty.
Gotcha.
The Maastricht Treaty caused a massive rebellion within the then still governing Conservative Party. It was the fourth term, and by now Maggie Thatcher had been ousted, and John Major was Prime Minister.
Oh, the big winner, John Major.
Yes, Johnny Boy, grey man he's known as. But
he's
very,
conservative in the end.
Very controversially at the time, Maggie Thatcher said that she would never have signed that treaty. And she was also to say that when she was Prime Minister, she was being deceived about what the Maastricht Treaty was actually about. So otherwise, she wouldn't have signed the Single European Act in '86. So Thatcher got fooled, frankly, and she admitted it. But that was the fire that lit the bonfire. That was what started Euroscepticism. It was when Maastricht was signed that Nigel Farage walked out of his city job that day going, bloody hell, we're going to lose everything. So that was the start of the Eurosceptic movement, really. Until then, it was a bit crank, but when Maastricht was signed, suddenly there was something concrete to point to. Hey, a single currency, we're going to lose the pound if we carry on down this route. Hey, foreign and security policy, we're going to lose control of our armed forces if we go down this route. So that was the start of the British rebellion, the British reaction. Of course, it's still a long time. What's that? 24 years until the actual Brexit vote. But if you want the origin of organised Euroscepticism actually meaning something, the Maastricht Treaty is where it kicks off. Now, skipping forward again, 2001, the Nice Treaty. So just further consolidation of power. And then in 2002, Euro coins and notes become the legal tender of EU member states. Now, that is the crunch point. No more franc, no more Deutschmark, no more lira, no more peso. It's euros for everybody. But the system was always fatally flawed, because even to this day, the euro does not have a consistent value right across the EU. It's worth more in the northern EU and less in the southern EU. And this is all part of how much of a dysfunctional mess these attempts to cheat nation states into a super state really was.
Well, you
2004
can't keep Italy and Greece on the ropes if you have a fair playing field.
2004, the biggest single enlargement: Cyprus, Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Malta, Poland, Slovakia, and Slovenia. And Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, of course, are now very strategic hotspots with the current conflict with Vladimir Putin and Ukraine. And if that war escalates, then it's what's known as the Slovakia gap. You see, if you could dash down through those countries, you can get down into Poland. So that's a key strategic corridor which is essential to hold. So that those Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania joining in terms of the balance of power and the relationship between America, Europe, and Russia. After what was originally a little bit of a honeymoon period when Mr. Putin first became Russia's president. I think he was originally. I mean, he was prime minister and he was president again. However, he fixed it. That was kind of the end of the start of this aggravation with Russia. Actually, was those countries joining the EU in 2004. Now, backtracking again, in 1997, the Conservatives were kicked out of power. And New Labour got into power, and it would govern for 3 terms until 2010. And this is very significant because if Prime Minister Tony Blair and then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown, had a bit more courage, they could very easily have bounced Britain into a referendum on the euro and saddled us with a single currency. And with general public naivety back in 2001, I happen to think if they went for it, they might very well have got away with it. They might have pulled it off because they were very popular at the time, and the government popularity was high. This is before Act Two, before that debacle happened. So if they had a bit more courage, they might have got away with it. Fortunately, they were too chicken. But you can imagine if Britain had joined the euro at the same time as the other countries, if Britain had abandoned the pound and joined up the euro, the chances of actually getting Britain out of the EU at that point would have been so much harder, because this is the bind that all countries that took the euro are now in. How do you leave a political union when you won't have a currency to use?
Mm-hmm.
That's a very major bind that keeps member states trapped in the logic of having to get along with the EU. And we never sacrificed that, because we never sacrificed the pound. And it also meant that when we did get to the arguments for Brexit, it was so much simpler than it would have been. And our debate could focus more on issues like sovereignty, and while immigration became very important, but it wasn't originally important. It was because of the impact of immigration that it became unavoidable. But we could look at these other areas. Whereas if Blair and Brown had wangled us into the euro in 2001, we would only been able to talk economics. It would have been the only argument. And you can see that in the southern European EU states now, Italy, Greece, oh God, poor Greece, Spain, Portugal. They could only talk about the economics of being in or out, because it's the only issue that matters. Because if you can't survive economically, you have no case to leave. So we really dodged a bullet back in 2001. 2005, this is also very important. Now,
but before we get to 2005, I just want to make a mental note for later. Someday I would like to know more about Poland and how it has become and remained just a little geographical mustard seed that neither seems to move forward or back on the world stage.
Well, I'm sure there's some Poles who would vigorously disagree with that. Poland is a great country, of course.
An example of that is we in the U.S. for some reason will not give them visa authorization.
I have no idea about that. I don't know why.
What's going on?
Is that a Cold War hang on that you concerned there might be a lot of reds under the beds? I've no idea. Because of course it was taken over by the Soviet Union and forced into the USSR. So Poland had to be liberated. But yes, back to Labour. Now, when Labour got elected for its next term in office, it did so on the absolute cast iron promise that there would be a referendum before we joined the European superstate.
I don't remember that.
Well, it was a key election promise, because from that point, from 1993 to 2005, Euroscepticism had grown, had become stronger, and had become more powerful. It still was by no means a big movement.
Yeah.
And there were things like the referendum party, that never managed to achieve a seat in parliament. So roughly about 5% of the population was avowedly Eurosceptic, but the majority was still not. But nevertheless, it was big enough as an issue that could have swung an election. So Labour had to offer a guarantee of a referendum. However, they found a wonderful dodge to get out of it. And again, if they'd have had the courage to have that referendum and win it, there would have been no Brexit in 2016. It would have been all over. There would have been nothing left, no ability to leave. But they didn't.
Well, there would be less reason to leave.
What happened was the proposed EU constitution failed because France and the Netherlands said no. So they had to go back to the drawing board. What they did was they took the words at the top of the document, EU some words got out, my constitution, right? EU constitution. They took some Tipex, right? They blobbed some Tipex over it, and then they wrote Lisbon Treaty. That was it. It was exactly the same thing. Apart from the name change.
Oh no.
No, yeah. Like I say, salami tactics, and if they do have a knockback, they just come forward again. You know, the path to the super state never ends. They never give up. Yeah, and that's what they did. But Gordon Brown, who was by then had taken over from Blair as Prime Minister because it was his turn apparently. You know, it's funny, right? We've had David Cameron resigned, Theresa May took over. No general election, right? And then later, Theresa May resigned, Boris Johnson took over. There was no general election. Now, there was confirmatory elections later, right? Now, we've just had Boris Johnson has been, stabbed in the back, set on fire and pushed out of the building, basically. And we have Liz Truss is now our Prime Minister. Again, no general election. But, you know, the left, bless them, Labour, go listen to them scream, it's not democratic. Was there a general election when Gordon Brown just took over from Tony Blair because it was now his turn? No, let's not mention it. It's all right when we do it.
Does the UK have a constitution?
No, and we're all the better for it, bizarrely enough. Because what we have is an unwritten constitution.
I've heard that.
Right, which is based on, you see, we've got two systems of law, basically. We've got common law and we've got statute law. So common law is law which has evolved over centuries. And common law isn't set by governments. You know, politicians can't write a new piece of common law. Common law is only based on the precedents of what's gone before.
Right.
But once you decide that something is right and proper, it's right and proper forever. So it's common law, which is actually the guarantee of British rights more than any other document. But then that's been added to by other pieces of government legislation, such as the Human Rights Act 2010, for example, is a very important piece of legislation in British society today. But if you were to, for example, murder somebody in Britain, if you were to face trial for murder, well, it's not encouraged, no, but that would be a common law offence, not a statute law offence. While in other countries, it's statute law that taking life is wrong, which is why we often criticise France for having Napoleonic law, which was top-down authoritarian government dictated. And the difference is, under common law, you're innocent until you're proved guilty. Under Napoleonic law, you were guilty unless you could prove you were innocent.
Oh.
So very different outlook on the two things. But yes, in 2007, basically, we get completely betrayed. The promised referendum does not arrive, and the current Prime Minister, who hasn't even been, he hadn't faced a general election at that point. You know, the current Prime Minister just said, hey, you know what, I'm just going to sign this. And what happened was the credit crunch. And this gave Brown a lot of cover, because when everybody was suddenly worried about the subprime mortgage stuff collapsing, it was more like 2008, you know, they didn't have time to think about the EU and think about sovereignty and think about what it might mean if we join a super state, because everyone had been so wound up into feeling panicked about what was going to happen to their mortgages. You know, that was really obsessing the national narrative. So again, Euroscepticism still wasn't getting much of a look in. But nevertheless, it was it was the point that Brown signed the Lisbon Treaty that I finally went, stuff it, I've had enough of this. Because I'd been watching this for years, and I think as a young man, I wasn't sure which side of the argument was right. I kind of had to learn about stuff. But the more I saw of what was happening in Europe, the less I liked it. To the point where, when it was very clear that we were going to completely throw away our ability to govern ourselves in any meaningful sense, and that our political class were quite happy to stop governing us to administering us for a foreign government. At that point, I had enough of that. I'm going to stand against this. I still even back then, like, I wasn't like, this is wrong, it must be stopped. I was just like, it's wrong, but we don't settle this democratically. It was wrong for this just to be a fait accompli because one guy used his pen when he only got into office, promising us we'd have a referendum, and we only denied a referendum because the name got changed on a piece of paper which is otherwise identical. And so for Brown to say that he didn't have to honour his pledge of a referendum because this wasn't the same document was an evil lie to tell the public. And again, a signal of his cowardice. So again and again, New Labour were cowards. When if they'd have been braver, they could have got away with it, frankly. But hey, it's not how it went. 2009, Eurozone in crisis because the world's in crisis economically. And then the end of this little summary here, God, I'd like to skip bits out. But in 2015, migrant crisis begins. And that was also, it's still going on today. And I mean, we've just had Meloni has just been elected in Italy. And
Yes.
I got to tell you, like, I'm not one to hide from the facts, right? I'm not going to whitewash this woman, right? She does come from a fascist background.
Yes, she does.
Right? I'm not going to deny it. We can massage it or think what we like about it, but it's very clear, what she represents and where she's coming from. But the real question isn't, is she a fascist? The real question is, why has Italy just elected her? And Italy's just elected her because voting for anybody else won't do bugger all about their problems. Can't fix the economic problem by voting for an EU centralist. Can't fix the migration problem by voting for an EU centralist. What do you do? Who do you vote for? So, unfortunately, I mean, Italy, God help them. Like, I mean, when the Eurozone crisis flared in 2009, the EU was in a crisis because it was to a certain extent British, but not so much, but mostly the German and French central banks who were underwriting all of these loans to these gimme states who'd been taking out the EU for years. But of course, hey, would you like some free money on top of that? We've got you now. Yeah, we've got you now. Now you owe us. But if what's called the pigs, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain, if the pigs had defaulted, that would be it. German economy gone, French economy gone. And they weren't having that, no siree. So what they did was they performed coups. They threw out the democratically elected prime ministers of these countries, and they imposed their own, mostly German, bureaucrats, technocrats to run those countries instead. So that's another reason that Italy has now voted in such an extreme way, because they've seen what happens when the EU puts in their austerity programs, forces massive poverty and waste of potential, massive youth unemployment, and then puts in their technocrats to enforce that. They've lived that pain. They've lived those consequences. So it's not surprising that they're fed up with centralist politicians who all sing from the same song sheet. So it's regrettable, but that's where we've got to in that country, because for so long the people have had no relief for the social issues which are dominating their lives.
Has Meloni said anything that sounds like, I haven't heard it. Has she said anything that sounds like Mussolini rhetoric?
I wouldn't say she said anything quite like that recently, but you don't have to dig too far into her political past to see that she was quite openly praising Mussolini in the late 1990s. And it's for friends you keep.
Well, I praised Richard Nixon for a while too.
I don't think he was quite Mussolini though, was he?
No, but to hear it from the media, he was
Was Nixon really a bad man, or was he stung and set up by a piece of sellotape over a door latch? I mean,
I think
what
he
was
was
that
stung and
really
set up.
about?
Yeah.
I suspect that he was somewhat stung and set up. Yeah,
Yes.
but hey, politics, it's a dirty game.
Dirty.
Yeah, so I mean, that's basically run through that timeline, but I think it's helped to establish some key points. Can we look at the next one, which was the Wikipedia on Euroscepticism in the United Kingdom? So again, this is just a bit of hard information, but let's front load it so people actually know what we're talking about.
Yes, let me do this and press the right button. The right button is an important button to push.
Did I spend 47 minutes talking about that? Blimey, how time flies.
we might be doing 2 videos.
I mean, you never know. You can cut me in 2 if you like. There we are. Euroscepticism in the United Kingdom. So let's just come down to the contents page. Come down a little bit to the contents box on this page.
Let me do that again. Let me do.
Yeah, just scroll down a little bit. Scroll down a little bit. Okay, so I mean, this is how they've divided it. 1945, impact of Suez, admission to 1975 referendum, 75 to 97, Maastricht, since 97. So let's start with since 97, because that's where Euroscepticism really goes. Now, this is James Goldsmith, financed the referendum party, fought in the 1977 election, didn't win anything, but it did get 800,000 votes. So, that was a good start. And then in 1990, but it was competing with UKIP, which had been founded in 1993. But when the referendum party then folded, it was UKIP that took up the banner. Now, the first European Parliament election in 1999 allowed for the first UKIP parliamentary representation. Now, this is what is so ironic about the history of British Euroscepticism. We could never have done it without the EU. And the reason is very simple. Elections for European Parliament were done by proportional representation. Therefore, every single vote counted. So if you were just one person, but you voted Eurosceptic, you were far more likely to end up with Eurosceptic representation because it was a list system, and there's so many MEPs to be allocated. And if you score high enough, you get an MEP allocated off the list, yes, rather than a first past the post winner take all system like Westminster is elected on. Because you see, in Westminster elections, Britain's divided into 650 races, effectively, electoral races, electoral constituencies. You'd might call them districts, I suppose, in the US. What do you call a voting area, a voting district? Yes. So Britain is split up into 650 individual races, right? So in a general election, if Conservatives get 45, Labour gets 35, and Liberal Democrats get 10, Conservatives win. Even though if you added Labour and Liberal Democrats together, they get more. They got 55. Yeah. So UK governments are commonly put into power on somewhere between 35 to 38% of the vote. But it also means that somewhere around 60% ish of the vote is wasted. Like here where I live, it happens to be very, 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 very conservative. Right. So it doesn't really matter if I vote or not. Right, in an election, I know who's going to win because this just isn't an area where there's strong Labour support. Lib Dems might squeak it if the government absolutely became terribly unpopular, but basically this is what's called a safe seat, right? So if you think about it, if you have a government with a majority of 30, say, which is pretty average, sometimes governments get bigger. We've got a big one at the moment, current government has 79 majority, but it really means that Of those 30 seats, only 16 need to vote the other way, and the other lot would be in the majority of one. So in British elections, most of these electoral races don't matter very much because they tend to return the same people they did last time. It's only the seats where there's a chance that it could actually change hands that has a chance of changing who gets into government. And it's also why it's so difficult for a single issue or for a small party to actually get a seat in Westminster. However, European Parliament elections were all proportional representation, and that meant that even from 1999, we could start to get a Eurosceptic voice in the heart of the EU itself. And oh my God, did they hate us for it? But they were stuck with it. I mean, they were stuck with it. Go and Google Nigel Farage EU Parliament, right, and go and hear. Well, I mean, we could look it up now, I suppose, but you know, go and hear how we would roast them in that chamber, and they would have to sit. Later. We would have to sit there. They would have to sit there and bear it. So it was their proportional representation system that allowed us a wedge that we slowly opened and opened and opened and opened until, you know, by the time we actually got round to having a referendum, half of the EU, which is open, we bugger off because we were sick to death of us. You know, perhaps we could make this work if only the British were gone.
So you used the system, the European system, in spite.
Mate, we used everything we had. Everything. Anything. We'd use anything. So here's this history. Let's get some again. So after the Conservatives lost power in 2000, well, they lost power in 1997, but they lost badly in 2001. Right. So at that point, it suddenly became more important for the Conservative Party to have Eurosceptic leanings, you know, or at least mutterings, or you know, a bit of a illusion at least that they cared about our national sovereignty and didn't want us to be part of a super state, you know. So that was also a key start to things starting to change around because the Eurosceptic vote was more right-wing than left-wing. However, it's a complete illusion that there's never been left-wing Euroscepticism. In fact, there's been strong Euroscepticism on the left, including by a certain Mr. Jeremy Corbyn and the far left side of the Labour Party. Well, they would speak against the EU because they'd say it was bad for jobs, you see, especially the uncontrolled migration. You've got cheap labour can come in any time. It's bad for unions, isn't it? Yeah. So there was a left-wing Eurosceptic argument, and there was left-wing Euroscepticism. However, the way things went, because Labour was in power and was in favour of the EU, it veered onto the right. You know, and people switched sides to come onto the right for this issue because they could see that what's the point of voting for a parliament if it's got no power because we're giving it all away to be ruled from the continent. You know, so I mean, this is the biggest weakness in the pro-EU argument for Britain. It's never made sense for an island nation to be governed from outside that island.
No.
And if you look around the world, you won't find many or even any examples of that ever happening and working for very long. Japan. Who wants to say Japan should be ruled from China? Nope. I mean, it's no different than saying why should Taiwan be ruled by China, you know? So, and I think Japan is a very good model for what Eurosceptic Brits have always seen British potential at, and as well as Switzerland, you know, to be a financial capital apart from the political scrummage, you know. So that's always been a key weakness to the pro-EU argument for Britain. As I say, it's always made sense for countries with a border with Germany. It always has, and it probably always will. You know, because why should they be competing against each other when we're just acting against what would be the interests of their natural geographic trade anyway? But while talking about that's one of the interesting things about the EU is that it never actually made a difference to our trade at all. The volume of trade that Britain did with Italy, Spain, Greece never went up at all.
Oh no, you were already the capital consumer.
Well, no, because what I mean is, it purely in geographics, the nearest markets are the most attractive and therefore ultimately the most lucrative ones. So the countries that we get by trading across the North Sea were still the countries that we still did the same proportion of trade with all the time that we were in the EU, and the promises that EU membership was going to open us up to trade with the whole of Europe, they were a lie. They were an illusion. It never happened because it never made sense.
You still have to pay for shipping.
Why should Italy get a widget from Britain when it can get a widget from Austria? Why would Britain get a widget from Greece when we can get a widget from Holland? It never made sense. It never made sense. So, it's all part of a la-di-da kind of illusions, lies, and we were told about what was really about power. It's only ever been about power, and a ruthless bunch with power too. So, where are we getting to now? 2009, UKIP 16% in that European election. So that is significant. That we're now into double figures. Euroscepticism is starting to rise. And it was Gordon Brown signing that treaty without giving us a referendum that really spread that. Now, I think we don't really need that anymore, that link. Let's have a look at some pictures. I sent you one earlier, which was the European election results 2009 compared to 2014. Can you dig that out for me?
Yes.
I think it was pretty much the first one I sent you.
Yes, it was. I just need to remove that and share. What do I want to share? I want to stop and share.
Because, I mean, visually, this is striking,
This one.
No, that's the referendum results. Was there another one above that? There was one which was 2009 compared to 2014.
Oh, the bar chart.
There we are, the bar chart at the bottom there. Yes, let's have a look at that. Right, okay, so here we are, right? There is the rise of UKIP in 4 years.
Yes. Surpassed the whole Labour Party.
Oh, it's also the destruction of the BNP, which was the British National Party, which is actual fascist party.
Oh.
So you can see how we rejected fascists. Britain always rejects extremists. Here's what happened, right? For 30 odd years, the BBC especially had a ban on anyone from the BNP being allowed on television, right? But then in this 2010 election, I think it was, they actually got more than one MEP, because you can see from their proportional vote that they've scored reasonably highly there. Yeah, so they had more than one seat, which meant that the BBC had a bit of a problem and actually had to give them a platform. So very famously, they suddenly put the leader of the British National Party, a guy called Nick Griffin, real odious toad, but there you go. They put him on telly, right? And he was such a slime ball. He was so awful. He was so contemptible. He was so disgusting. The BNP died overnight.
Wow.
And there is a very key argument. You should not no platform extremists. You should not hide them away. You should not stick them in the cupboard where they can fester like mushrooms and grow. You put them in the light, you debate the hell out of them, and you show just what tosspots they are. And the British people will always reject extremists because we do not believe in it. We believe in a moderate, free society where we meet in the middle and get along. At least we did until ideas from California started to infest our education system in more recent years, but that's another matter altogether. We'll probably do a talk on wokeness sometime. But certainly, in terms of what was happening in this country 12 years ago, the BNP were seen for what they are, and then UKIP truly came into its own. And over those years, of course, we had austerity, which we all pretended was government policy, but really was imposed by Central European diktat, which is why everybody had austerity all across the European Union. And then, because we had austerity, we had less money in our pockets. We had local services were being squeezed, and of course, we do have socialised medicine here with the NHS.
Mm-hmm.
And we do have private medicine, but it's really only the wealthiest Brits that will have private medicine. Most Brits will not have private health insurance. And the thing is, when you don't have private health insurance, you get what you're given.
Yes.
And when certain areas of population was booming because of the influx of Schengen migrants coming in, under free movement, the local services, the schools, and the doctors especially were getting overwhelmed. And that's what began to really rub the working class majority of society up the wrong way, because they were the ones losing out. And whereas it used to be that you could ring up a doctor and see them that morning, now it was getting, well, we got an appointment in a week. And now, even nowadays, it's more like we got an appointment in 2 weeks, So there are certain parts, especially along the south coast of Britain, where the population density is rivaling Bangladesh.
Wait, what?
Yes. If you went to areas like Portsmouth, Southampton, or these areas along the south coast of Britain, which, of course, English Channel, closest to the markets, closest to foreign trade, that's where the lion's share of immigration was coming into those sort of areas, as well as the big cities. Yes,
They just stayed there.
That's where the services were struggling the most. And that's where people were starting to feel the impacts the most of the policies, which critically the British government could no longer change.
It is worth mentioning that today, and I know you saw this, I forget if it was Prime Minister's office or what genius has declared that anyone coming in on the channel is considered not to be an illegal alien or an illegal immigrant, merely a departing passenger.
Look, we've got a constant battle inside our society with forces that want to drag us one way, trying to fight against forces that want to drag us another. And, the Brexit result in 2016 certainly wasn't the end of the story. In fact, the fight was only become more bitter. But for now, let's keep our focus on 2014. What do you think happened when that happened? When suddenly UKIP was running away with 43% of the vote in the European election.
That's when you have to turn the media into a major tool and weaponize the smear campaigns.
Oh, well, that was to come. Yeah, but what was the impact on the governing Conservative Party to see that result and to see them come third in the European election in 2014? What was the impact?
I think there was probably a panic that happened.
They shat a brick. Right. UKIP was no longer a 5% rump that was safely contained at the bottom of the polling while the Conservatives were fighting Labour for first place. Suddenly, the Conservatives were being deeply, deeply embarrassed and also deeply threatened, because what if those UKIP members stayed UKIP when it came to voting in a general election? Well, that's the Conservatives out of power.
Yes, it would.
So David Cameron, then Conservative Prime Minister, had no choice. He was in an arm lock, and it was due to be a general election the next year, which he couldn't avoid. He was going to have to fight it, and he was basically, as Farage says, the UKIP fox was in his hen house. So he had no choice. He had no choice but to state that if people voted Conservative in 2015, there would be a referendum on continued membership of the European Union, in 2016.
Interesting.
That's
what
that.
it's about.
There would never have been a referendum, House. There would never have been a referendum. So if it wasn't for the EU's proportional representation system for electing MEPs to its parliament, we would never have been able to panic and pressure the British Prime Minister to force him into giving us a referendum. And believe you me, he really didn't want to, because without that, he couldn't maintain power. So he took a risk. He took a risk that he could win that referendum and put the issue to bed and say, oh, we've had that referendum. It's a once in a lifetime choice. See you in 20 years, kids. He had to give UKIP what it wanted.
So at this point, were you involved, or was that still?
I was very much deeply involved at this point. As I say, I effectively entered a state of lawful rebellion when Gordon Brown signed Lisbon. Now, lawful rebellion, you're laughing, you must know something about it.
I know a little about that.
I mean, lawful rebellion is basically where you say, hey, look, I'm a law-abiding citizen, right? But you lot are despicable, and therefore I refuse to be governed by you. And look, it's largely symbolic, right? Yeah. I mean, the government is force, right? If you really upset them, call yourself what you like, it ain't going to help. But it was symbolic. It did matter, So I ran a campaign back in 2009, which I should explain. I would love to show you what I did because I was ever so involved, and I had a very, very real impact. But the problem is, everything I created was destroyed by Mark Zuckerberg, chiefly. Because most of what I did was using this new medium called Facebook, you see. And up until 2009, I had been an inhabitant of internet forums, right? But when I stopped talking about other topics, like, I don't know, 9/11 truth or something, and I started to talk about having a referendum on the EU, I needed to go where the public were, not on some little forum which is just a bunch of geeks, really. I had to reach out to the general public. So I embraced Facebook, and Facebook was my key weapon that I used for my my Brexit activism. And in that time, I had many thousands of followers. I had a Facebook group with over 12,000 active members. I had Facebook pages with thousands of followers. I wrote article, put them all out on Facebook. And look, I'm not here to blow my own trumpet, right? But there was a study that showed that as few as 25 people were responsible for a majority of the pro-Brexit content that found its way onto Facebook in the time until the referendum. And yeah, you could put me down as one of those.
Where did you rank?
Well, I wouldn't know because they didn't give us a list, But yeah, I was very, 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 very effective.
How many of those 25 were you? Maybe that's a better question.
Well, well, only me. I don't believe in this multi-ID rubbish, right? If you've got a good case, you don't need multiple accounts to make it. You can just do it in your own name without fear and be all the more powerful for it. And I'm a living testament to that approach. So but yeah, Facebook. But Mr. Zuckerberg took his revenge. And on the third anniversary of the Brexit vote, on 23rd of June, 2019, without any explanation, without any complaint, without any communication, my account was killed. So all of that legacy that I would have loved to be able to show you what I was doing over those years, has been destroyed. And naive me at the time, I didn't have a backup, I didn't have a copy, and it's all gone. Now, I did write to certain US senators which were supposed to be holding Mr. Zuckerberg to account, because they asked people to write into them if they had their human rights abused by Mark Zuckerberg. Did I hear back from them? No. Did you do anything effective about it? no, like, don't let me be bitter, America, but Facebook is your bloody problem, and you still need to sort it out.
We're doing our
But
best.
at the time that I was using it, especially 2014 to 2016, there was no shadow banning, there were no restrictions. It was a level playing field. It was Rafferty's rules, and by God, we made them suffer for it. Because when you could put a clear, common sense case to the people without restriction and being allowed to function equally and fairly to the pro-establishment voices, yes, you win. Why else do they do the shadow banning? It's not for jollies. They do it because they have to. They do it because they've learned that if they don't keep a lid on the public organising to speak its truth, they lose power. So, and of course, it was November 2016 that Donald Trump got into power as well. So, it was a double whammy. And we could show our first picture at this point, I would think, because I do love this one. It's a great cartoon.
Which one are we looking at?
The hat and the squid. We'll run up.
Oh, the hat and the squid.
The hat and the squid.
The hat and the squid. That one right there. Oh yeah, we gotta zoom that one up. Oh yeah.
Oh, I see we've got some comments in the chat here. We've got, oh, hi, Uncle. Hello, Genuine Comics. Hello, mate. Yes.
Let me push that. There we go.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah. That's 2016 in a nutshell, that is. What the hell? Two tentacles lopped straight off, and that was how they felt. That was how they felt. I mean, that's a perfect cartoon, that one. I absolutely love that one. And yes, I've linked that loads. Let's just run up through these pictures now, one by one. We might as well. What's our next
that one? And I think testicles.
Testicles, tentacles. It was bad news for them anyway.
Right.
But that's the result that the little people can have when they're allowed a free and equal voice. And that's why they've spent every minute of every day since then working out how to restrict us, shut us up, and stop us ever being able to do it to them again.
So I didn't pull in all 100 pictures you gave me.
But just let's run up through we got. They're all good fun.
Thatcher, the Thatcher meme.
No. The wisdom of Maggie, if they attack you personally, it means they have not a single political argument left. She was ever so sharp. She was ever so intelligent. She was a real force. She really was. And how right she is. And how does that describe Twitter today?
I think that just right up front tells you no one has an actual valid argument. And she's a woman much like the Queen. She, as I understand, was sharp and clear until about the last couple of years of her life.
Well, she did develop dementia in her late life, yes, and it's very sad. And they did that film with Meryl Streep, The Iron Lady.
I haven't watched it, but I have.
Well, it's a great performance in terms of acting. It's a fantastic performance, and the Falkland scenes in that are chilling. However, it was an attack on Maggie Thatcher because the whole basis of the film was viewing her life from the prism of her being a silly old demented sod, rather than really showing her in her prime in a proper linear way. So yeah, it wasn't really a film celebrating Thatcher so much as smearing her, really.
Yeah,
but nevertheless, never forget this. Never forget this. If you've ever got people coming at you and all they've got is personal attacks, it means they've got nothing.
They got nothing.
Push your advantage and win on facts, win on evidence, win on argument, make them pay.
Absolutely.
This is the way. This is the way. And then you get pictures like the next meme, which is a result of that, where Angela gets absolutely furious.
Oh, every time I see her, I just keep wondering how did she get there? She must be a really okay. I hear that Angela Merkel is actually very, very tight with Putin, and as we know, Putin controls all of the politics.
Well, I think the thing is, I mean, I hear a lot of things about Angela Merkel, and I wouldn't want to speculate how many of them are actually true, but there is no doubt that, like I said, back in 2001, when Putin first became president of Russia, and the belief was that he was going to modernize it, and so on, there was an attempt to have a bit of a love affair, and a bit of a better era, and get on better in the old days, and that sort of thing. And it did lead to a certain EU naivety about Russia, which of course now has the EU completely over a barrel because it abandoned its own energy security in the promise of Russian gas, and
worse than that, they did
nuclear
that
power for windmills that rust up and don't work, And
they wanted to force Germany onto green, and now they got nothing.
Yeah.
You can't just turn on coal and gas furnaces. You can't.
It takes heavy industry to do that. And of course, one of the prices Britain paid for its membership of the EEC was it was divvied up who was getting what, you see. So we lost our shipbuilding, we lost our heavy industry, and ultimately we lost most of our coal mining. But in return, and our fishing, because we love our fish. In return, we were allowed to become, we were allowed to become the service economy, especially the City of London. That was kind of the deal. You could be fantastic on the world banking scene, but you can't be building all these ships or having all this fantastic steel anymore. And you're right, it can't just be brought back. It takes years of work to build that up. But Germany kept its steel, we did not, and that was part of the price of the EU. Let's do the next one.
Farage.
Yes, good old Nigel. Good old Nigel. So this is just typical of the sort of piss-taking, Mickey-taking memes that were knocking around at the time. We're going to leave and you're going to fall over. I mean, I can't say that our referendum campaign didn't involve a lot of piss-taking, because it did. Because of course, how do you most effectively pop the illusion of the emperor of no clothes? By laughing at him, by mocking him. And of course, all tyrants and autocrats and authoritarians, but what they hate most of all is humor, because it's so hard to stop people laughing. And once you're an object of ridicule, it's very hard to be taken quite so seriously. So, yes, the British ability to take a piss is a big part of our national character. And this meme is just typical. Is it even a meme? I suppose it is. It communicates in one image. So I suppose it is a meme. But yeah, I mean that's just catches the spirit of our rebellion perfectly. We don't give a crap, mate. We're not sticking around for this. We're not going to be governed by you. Yeah, you can take your little scheme and watch it fall apart, because we ain't playing no more. Oh, we're taking our money with us too.
Yes.
Which is a real blow. Let's do the next one. Characterization of the EU. The vampire squid, with the decoration of the UN, the United Nations symbol around its neck. It's got the gold, it's got the money, and there's Spain, there's Germany, there's France, there's Italy, and there's Britain legging it. And of course, the Tower of Babel at the back, because the EU's Parliament building is based on the biblical Tower of Babel. They like their symbolism. But hey, there we go. So that's another typical picture that we've been doing around at the time. We're getting out of this. Made by an American, I think.
Really?
Isn't that American? I'm not sure, but we had a bit of support from across the channel, and we came and helped people out later as well. Next one I love. This.
My generation fought for Britain. My generation rebuilt Britain. Those uneducated, xenophobic racists stole my generation's future. Ban them from voting.
That's Remain in a nutshell. That is the attitude that we were up against. It's the attitude that we are still up against in British politics today. And of course, the pound's had some trouble in the last few days. Everyone's in a panic about it because this is the thing, right? With the Remainers, right? They would say you're the small-minded ones, you're the xenophobic ones, you're the racist ones, right? Whereas nobody was more ignorant of the EU and how it actually worked, what it was actually about, and the price actually being paid by over 100 million Europeans pushed into dire poverty than this bunch. Because as far as they were concerned, we are even wrong. The EU is wonderful and marvellous, and reality, in fact, has got nothing at all to do with it. So they were the spitting lunatics. We had the dignity because we had the facts on our side. We had the evidence on our side. We had the arguments on our side. And back to Maggie Thatcher, when all they can do is insult you, they haven't got a political argument left. Does that look like a political argument to you?
It looks a lot like any day on Twitter.
It looks, well, I suppose it does, yes. But, Twitter wasn't what it was then. It wasn't what it was now then. Twitter's got so much worse as time's gone on. But this was disgusting. This was the attitude that we had to go up against. And, of course, this is the attitude that we met on the streets because in the last 6 weeks before the actual referendum vote, it was street campaigning. And I will come to that. Look, he who dares wins. Yes. Winner takes all. Right? That is how life works. And we simply wanted it more. We were hungrier for it. We were more passionate for it. We cared about it. So I remember those 6 weeks, right? I would go out during the day, go on a street stall and talk referendum all day long with people passing by, have very spirited discussions with some people. And I had some people come along who thought they knew better, who got very well educated about how much they didn't know. So I was doing a tour of public, changing hearts and minds, because the thing about a referendum, you see, every single vote counted. No constituencies, just a straight plebiscite. Everybody gets a vote. Whoever gets the most vote wins. So you couldn't have a wasted conversation. Well, you could waste your time having a conversation not worth having. If you try to talk to somebody you weren't going to get to, that was a waste of time. But you could take your time, you could take every single opportunity to get out there and have real conversations with people. And we were doing it, and Remain was not doing it anything like as much. And if they were doing it, it was this sort of stuff. Oh, yeah, those racist Brexiteers, they don't understand how to be progressive, whatever else they were trying to come up with, But the thing is, their arguments didn't convince, our arguments did. I remember particularly talking to one grandmother, I think she was, she was in her mid-60s, I think. And I said to her, look, I don't know if we'd be better off or not if we leave or stay in the EU. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you what I do, because nobody really knows that. But what I do know is if we don't vote to leave, if we stay in, we will lose the ability to ever make an effective choice to change things ever again. Because none of the decisions that govern our lives will be made in this country anymore. So which is the better option for all of our futures, to have control ourselves or to surrender control to somebody else, to another country who's got its own interests above ours? And I persuaded her. I turned her from Remain to leave on that. Just be honest. I don't know if we're better off or not, but what matters is our freedom, our self-determination, our sovereignty. And this is what went on the street against this sort of spitting behaviour, which still didn't understand, still to this day doesn't understand why it lost, because it refuses to learn anything. Let's do the next one.
Let's do.
Oh,
Merkel
Yes.
and
Merkel and Macron and Merkel. Yes, and this. I got to be honest. I'm not saying I would share this these days because I think maybe it's become a little bit charged, and I think as a cartoon that is quite charged. But nevertheless, it very accurately describes how people felt in Europe, not here so much, but especially in Greece, Italy, Italy, and Spain, where they were having these migrants come over in huge amounts from Libya, especially. And as far as the leaders of the EU were concerned, you know, your national sovereignty doesn't matter. That's why Macron's standing on the French flag there. You know, he's portrayed as an aristocratic fop who's detached from the people. And there's Mrs. Merkel with, you know, this hiding this social problem under her dress. So I think the cartoon hits the spot, but I think that, you know, yeah, I probably wouldn't actually share it, not now. I think I've become a little more sensitive to these things, but you know, that was the sort of thing that was knocking about back then. Let's do the next one. I love this one.
This is my favorite.
This is a newspaper cartoon. Mac, who publishes in the Daily Mail, right? And this is just perfect. This completely describes what was happening in the days up to the actual referendum, like last few days. I think this was like maybe 3 days before the vote, right?
Yeah.
You've got it. I don't know if you can do British sports commentary properly, so I'll have to go for you. Right?
You'll have to do that.
You got a horse. And I guess Brexit over massive fence, and the barbed wire, past the city stakes, just George Osborne's let boys to go. You know. But yeah, there's the main. Right, every possible advantage, smooth run. Yeah, every impediment taken out of the way, every possible support the establishment can give it, because the Conservative Party leadership did not want Leave to win. Even Boris Johnson, we might be dubious over whether he really wanted Leave to win. I'll come to that in a moment. But there you are. You've got a high fence with barbed wire. You've got more barbed wire. You've got a pit of snakes just for landmines to go. That really describes how biased the media coverage was against us Brexiteers. I would say, I think it came out, the BBC was something like 85% Remain, in terms of who got airtime and who was allowed to speak, and whose arguments were allowed to be heard. You know, the media bias was disgusting. But I tell you what, we're not like that. If you put our backs up like that, we just get more bloody minded. But that's our nature. That's our character. We don't take well to that sort of thing. And people could see that this was how this was going. Now, 7 days before the referendum, despite all of these efforts and advantages, Leave was polling 7% ahead. And then something terrible happened. The MP Jo Cox was murdered in the street, shot and stabbed.
Jo Cox.
Yeah, she was a Labour MP.
On the stairs or on the steps to the parliament?
No, it was out in the street in her home constituency. Can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, damn it. Beeston, something like that, up in Yorkshire. I'm probably wrong about that, so forgive me if I got that wrong, anybody. But yeah, Jo Cox was killed. And the thing is, like, this guy who killed her is a guy called Tommy Mayer. He was a loner, he was a bit of a nutter. And the day before, Jo Cox and her husband had been on the national news, boating up and down the Thames in a boat, waving a pro-EU flag, while Bob Geldof was on this big pressure cruiser, giving fishermen protesting for Leave the middle finger, the 2 fingers, and generally being really unpleasant. And the national mood was hitting boiling point. There was a sense that you could tell people were getting really angry. People were starting to call each other traitors and things like this. And in the midst of that mood, one guy took it upon himself to kill his MP. God alone knows, right? He was no friend of mine, right? And whatever he did, or whatever reasons he thought he was doing it, it was horrible, and it was just horrendous, and it was an awful thing to happen with just 7 days to go before a vote at the time that Leave was 7 points ahead. And I'm not going to suggest that there's anything other coincidence involved here, but immediately Leave dropped 5 points. And it's interesting because the final vote was 52-48. So that reflects that loss of points. But we had I took there was a break in campaigning for 2 days, which was better observed by our lot than their lot, to be honest with you. But there we go, we observed it anyway. So we did no campaigning, and then it was 5 days to go. So I mean that was a really bittersweet thing, and it's a terrible thing, and it should never have happened. But unfortunately, this one man with problems was wound up to this point that he did that terrible thing, and of course he'll never see the outside world again. He's banged up for life. But that was an awful thing, and but nevertheless we had to persevere and we moved on. And let's see the next one. And this is what it was all about. You see, this is a picture of the official government guide to the referendum campaign. And here is another example of bias, right? Because we have this thing called PERDA, right? Which is that just when an election's coming up, the government has to remain impartial within a certain number of days of that. So before the official start of a referendum campaign, without having to declare it as referendum spending, the government blew millions of pounds sending this leaflet to every house in Britain. And it was an argument for Remain. It was a pro-Remain leaflet. But this bit here was the bit that mattered. This is your decision. The government will implement what you decide. And that is a cast iron written promise.
Yep.
And that became very, 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 very controversial after the victory. Because that we had another 4 years of the establishment doing everything it possibly could to delegitimize the vote, overturn the vote, ignore the vote, have another vote, doing everything they could to wiggle out of it. But there it is in black and white. Yes. And that's what we nailed them to. We refused to take anything else as an answer. Because we see, look, we didn't just win the 2016 referendum. Right, we won the 2014 Euros, the 2015 general election, the 2016 referendum, the 2017 general election, and the 2019 Euro elections and general election. Before we could actually get Brexit to happen, we had to beat these buggers 6 times. That's how hard we fought. That's how hard we didn't give up. That's what it took. Now, I mentioned about Boris Johnson. Was he ready for Brexit or not?
I don't know.
You see, if you want to control an argument, the best way you can do that is to control the major voice each side of the argument.
Yeah.
And there's a famous story that Boris, being trained as an old Etonian, wrote 2 essays. One where he wrote in favour of Leave, one where he wrote in favour of Remain. Right, and that after much soul searching and toing and throwing, he chose to stand for Leave. Now, what would have happened if the Conservatives did not have a senior MP supporting Leave? UKIP Fox in the hen house. We control the debate.
Yes,
and
that's totally what would happen.
A very, very significant thing about the official vote. I'll get the right way around here. Which was Vote Leave and which was Leave EU, because there were multiple campaigns running. I think the government one was Vote Leave. God blimey, easy to forget. But Boris Johnson had to be forced into talking about immigration. For the first 2 weeks or so of the official campaign led by him, they didn't even want to talk about it. It took us It took pressure from UKIP to force immigration into the debate, after which Boris then started to say absolutely stupid things about immigration and it looked a lot like souring the debate. Oh, look, you believe something stupid. What are you saying that stupid stuff about Turkey for? Everyone knows Turkey's not going to join. So, I mean, there was stuff like that that was part of it all. But no, Boris did have to be brought to making a more proper Eurosceptic argument. And even so, there were arguments that we could not get made on the national telly. One of which was about tax. Because most British people to this day do not know that they have an EU tax number, and that the EU had plans, which is now scrapped, but it had plans which it certainly would have brought in if Remain had won, to start European income tax, so that the EU would directly have its hand in your pockets at your wages, bypassing your national government. And a full tax system was designed, implemented, tax numbers allocated, but never activated, because we were never able to quite get away with that salami step. But that would have been a fantastic pro-leave argument, but we could never get them to make it. So even to this day, that there's an argument which is mostly unmade. But this was ultimately critical, because once we'd had our victory, we accepted nothing less. The government will implement what you decide.
Yes.
And ultimately, of course, they did. Next slide, so to speak. This is Varoufakis, who was the Greek finance minister. And he came to Britain to argue for Remain. And I must admit, this one's one of mine, but this is like imagining his face after the result. That moment you realise Brexit is real. I mean, that face says 1,000 words.
It does.
I mean, context to be damned. It's a meme. It's very funny. But of course, who else came and threatened us if we didn't vote Remain?
Well, I assume Angela Merkel did.
No, not her. Closer to home for you, Lonnie.
Closer to home. That Obama.
President Obama, absolutely. He came over and he said, look, if you vote leave, you guys are the last in the queue for any trade deals. We're going to treat you like shit. We're going to have contempt for you. So know your place and vote like you're told. Guess how down that went? That don't down with British people. Thank you for that visit, Mr. Obama. It was an immediate 3-point bounce for leave.
I have, the things that are going on in American government make me think that the Democrat Party is running a counter campaign on every front.
Oh, they do. They are. I mean, it's globalists, a global effort. And as far as the EU, it was only one component of the final global system. I mean, what does trilateralism mean? What's the Trilateral Commission for? What have been working towards since the 1930s? The world split into 3 regions under one global government. What did George Orwell write about? What did Aldous Huxley write about? This is what it's been about all along, But who should run the world? How should it be organised? Who should have power? Who should have a say? Are we about freedom or are we about control? And everything is about these arguments. Let's do the next one.
Okay.
Jean-Claude Juncker, then EU Commission President. Spain beats up and arrests Spanish citizens because they want to vote on their future. What Spain does in its own country, it's its own business. Because the Spanish government was pro-EU, you see. So if you want to beat up their own citizens to stop them protesting, that's fine. Hungary builds a fence, Poland reforms its courts, Czech Republic refuses illegal migrants' entry. This concerns everyone in Europe. Emergency EU Parliament session. EU must defend democracy, mirror European values, launch legal probe, economic sanctions, Guy Verhofstadt speech. You know, this is what they're like. Yeah, whatever human rights abuses were going on, as long as it was in their favour, stum. Right? Whenever something was happening that they didn't like, crisis.
Juncker the Drunker was all in.
Oh, Yankee the Drunker. There's some terrible footage of him absolutely pissed at a fart, you know, but hey, he likes his French wine.
Yes, he does. He has a little trouble upstairs, as I recall.
We didn't miss seeing the back of this clown, but I mean, von der Leyen, she's no better, you know. But hey, not so much our problem anymore. Next one I stuck in just for the truth value.
Just because.
Yeah, the left can't meme because a meme is an idea.
And how? And how?
And that was a key to our victory as well. We had ideas. We were creative. We were expressing ourselves. We were constantly developing our messaging and reaching more and more and more people. While the pro-EU lot, who, yes, overwhelmingly are leftist, you know, was sat there going, "But you're racist."
I can tell you what I'm against, but I can never tell you what I'm for.
Tell you what I'm for, because no one's told me what to think yet. Absolutely. This is before this would be before the NPC meme started up. I mean, that's everywhere now, isn't it? You know, beep beep. Yeah. I support the current thing. You know, hey. But yeah, I put that in there just for the truth value. That's why the left can't. Everyone says the left can't meme, but they never explain why. It's because a meme is an idea.
Yes.
Next one, just a fun little cartoon.
Once we get on our end of the boat, we're gonna sock you in the nose.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna miss that one. Let's do the next one. EU. If you discard human rights so easily, humans will be right to discard you. That's one of mine. That's one of mine I was putting out.
Nice.
You can tell that's off Facebook, actually, because that's one of those Facebook auto background things with the hands, with the fingers. I wouldn't normally pick that, but you know, it was the most fitting one for the message I wanted to put out that day. You can see I've cut that off my Facebook page.
John, hold on for just 1 second.
Sure thing. Well, while Lottie's gone, I'm in charge. Wow, brilliant. Right, anyone listening to this, it's my turf now, and I want to know, have you got what it takes to be a Brexiteer? You know, have you got the character? Have you got the guts and the grit? Because that's what it was all about. You know, it really was about will and determination and not allowing them to tell you what you could think, to tell you what you could agree with, to tell you what you could want, to tell you what you could vote for. You know, so Brexit was the biggest, most democratic exercise that ever happened in British history. The greatest exercise in democracy there could ever be. I was just filling some space, you know. Yeah.
My wife ordered something expensive looking.
Oh dear, that sounds dangerous.
So this is one of yours.
Yeah, that was one of mine. But yeah, that was one of, you know, you can see that was one of those Facebook backgrounds we did at the time.
Yeah.
But it was just one of my little word plays, you know. But there was no limit to the ways in which we're trying to hit the mark. So, you know, I mean, just try any. I put out so many different messages to get into so many different audiences. And of course, at the time, my Facebook was huge. You know, 25,000 followers. I was easily getting hundreds, thousands of retweets, shares.
Silence you fast, didn't they?
Yeah, we were really hitting it. This one I put in to honour you guys a little bit, because it's a touch of cultural appropriation going on here, but also so fitting. The next one up, Lonnie.
So true.
True. So true. There you go. That's what it's about. Anyway, Patrick Stewart is English. even though he's a lefty idiot, so we can claim him, you see. So we're obviously renting his spaceship that day.
Because no one can own anything.
As an image, that really encapsulates what it was like to be up against it and just not give in no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
And the last picture is the story.
There we are.
51.9 to 48.1. Now, even though, strictly speaking, this wasn't a regional vote, this does divide it into regions to show you which won which argument. So you can see you've got wealthy areas in the south where people were generally into their affluence and thought that the EU was better for their wealth, so the EU would win in the south areas there. Then you've got like a little bit of tip of Cornwall, and there's a bit of the coast of Wales, Northern Ireland, and the entire of Scotland. All majority voted Remain.
Scotland is that wealthy?
Some bits. I mean, there are wealthy Scots, yes.
Yes.
And I want to talk about this more. Now, I actually sent you an extra picture on Twitter just not that long ago, which was a picture of a sign with saying funded by the European Union. So if you look back on your Twitter, you'll see a picture there. If you can add that in, because I want to talk about this because this is why Scotland and that part of Wales and Northern Ireland voted Remain. Can you see that picture on your Twitter messages, Lonnie?
Yes,
as one I sent to you. If you can have that one.
Just save this.
But there is the distribution of the vote, and you can see that effectively England voted Leave overwhelmingly, and the north, the south, the east, the west, the anti-establishment result, the sticking the two fingers to the man, the sticking it to those assholes who tried to tell us what we could believe in, what we could think, and what we were allowed to support, and that's what it got them. So that's an object lesson all of its own. Have you found that picture? It's on your Twitter DM.
I did, and I'm having a little bit of a fuss with my computer. Let me do just a little bit.
Carry on, but there you are. That's a thing of beauty.
Oh,
and I mean that's what it came down to, because the arguments that came after this, like, oh, it should have been advisory. Oh, you should have had to have 60% in order to win. All of these sort of things. But no, it was set up as a winner-takes-all competition. That's how we approached it. That's how we fought it, and that's how we won it.
Mm-hmm.
One mind at a time. And I mean, it's something. It really is something to be proud in. It's a democratic exercise, as the amount of work put in to bring people onto our side, to get to ignore what was called Project Fear. But this explains a very great deal. Right, there's a road sign. You'll see these any economically disadvantaged brackets area in Britain. You will see these signs.
Is that Welsh?
Yes, that is. That's probably going into Cardiff, I would think. EU funds investing in Wales in this particular one, right? But even today, 6 years after leaving the EU, we've still got EU-funded projects going on because we were set up to run for so many years. Mm-hmm. But what's really vital here is remember manufacturers rebate.
Yes.
Right? We would give them money, but we would get some back, but it came with strings, because A, the EU defined what it could be spent on, B, whatever it was spent on had to have the EU messaging on it. So if you think about the areas that strongly voted Remain, Scotland, coast of Cornwall actually didn't listen to the fear messaging because they want their fishing back. Coast of Wales, these are all areas where the EU poured funds in for years and years and years. bribing the people, bribing the politicians, building a pro-EU consensus. And they did that deliberately, trying to engineer it so that we would not be able to vote our way out in a referendum.
So rather than having a good idea, they resorted to social engineering.
Absolutely. With our money, which we could just as easily spend ourselves,
doing the very same thing.
Yeah, but instead they got to define how it was spent. They spent it strategically to undermine British sovereignty, and they got the credit for it as well. And that's the kind of institution that we were dealing with in the European Union and how it operated. And of course, of course you love the spending if you're in those areas, but because it's not presented to you accurately, because you don't understand that we've already given away more money than that could ever cost. It's just our own money coming back at us, because unless you understand that we put more into the EU than we ever got out, how does that make sense, Lonnie?
It doesn't make sense.
But it makes a great deal of sense to Scotland, you see. For Scotland, of all the areas of Britain, I mean, of course, Scotland is its own country, was the most strongly bribed. And Scotland's politicians, frankly, are the most corrupt, mendacious, and lying politicians in the country. So, today you've got the narrative, we need a second Scottish independence referendum. Well, we need to be free of Westminster. I mean, it's all lies upon lies upon lies, but it's produced a hostility in the supporters of the Scottish National Party, at least in Scotland, which is really bordering on anti-English xenophobia at this point. And the EU has been instrumental in that, despite the fact that spending per head is highest in Scotland, higher even than London, it's higher than any other area of the country. The Scottish people get a better deal than anyone else, and have been led by deceptive politicians over decades now to resent Britain as a whole for it. So, make of that what you will. The EU is so cynical, right? You see, in the UK, we've got this thing called hashtag FBPE, right? It means follow back pro-EU. So it's the Remain hashtag, which they still use today. Right? And what it means is, we want to be back in the EU, we hate Brexit, and the EU is wonderful. Now, you wouldn't find a more ignorant bunch of people about the EU than the FBPE cultists. And EU politicians have exploited them ruthlessly over the last 6 years by making all sorts of promises, but, oh yes, we'll let you back in, etc., etc., etc. But the reality is that there is no way back. And the reason that there's no way back is that when you get beyond the myopic self-obsession of these real little Englanders, Remainers, they know almost nothing about what goes on in the EU. They understand almost nothing about the problems that the EU has, about the political dilemmas that the EU is facing. So they think, oh, you can just go back to the status quo. But that status quo simply wouldn't be on offer again. The EU is never going to let us back in with a massive rebate, for example. They treat us very harshly if we got back in, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to maintain their control of newer member states, newer entry member states, you see.
Not at all, no.
Also, people don't realise that the EU itself is split into power blocks, 3 of which have got no interest in ever allowing Britain back in. Because one simple reason, Britain having left the EU, Britain takes away its 72 members of the European Parliament, which leaves a vacuum but it could be redistributed in power so that other groupings that had other objectives, especially ones that were constantly frustrated by Britain, have got no intention of seeing us back. You've got the northwestern EU, which is, the pro-German part.
Right.
Then you've got the southwestern and sort of South Mediterranean, which is the pigs, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, and they are, they've suffered so much under austerity and their debts to German and French banks. So they want to see.
Oh, haven't they?
Yeah. Then you've got the kind of Austria, Bavaria kind of area, and they want to make sure that they're continuing to get the best deal. And again, being always get on with us. And then you've got the East European countries, and they want more say and more power. So they're never going to want to have Britain come back in. So there's all sorts of reasons that these power blocks within the EU will never turn the clock backwards. But these politicians will gaslight the British people till the cows come home, feed them garbage, and do it because what they want to do is destabilise what is now, competition. So if they can politically destabilise us, if they can politically destabilise Britain, so that we're constantly unhappy with our politicians, that we're not unified under our government, we're not confident of our choices, and basically continue to push the narrative that this is all about, racist, xenophobic bigots, and not democracy, sovereignty, and self-rule. They continue to do this damage. And they will continue. And I think the worst example of this is Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland is part of the Union of the United Kingdom, right? Mm-hmm. Ireland is part of the European Union. So that border between Northern Ireland and Ireland itself, yes, is now a border between a land border, the only land border between the British state and the EU superstate. So the EU have used that as a way to make sure that it looks like Brexit is a failure by making it impossible to agree tariffs and trades and everything else, which has caused untold bureaucratic problems trying to trade in and out across that land border, or trade from Northern Ireland into the UK, and it is still not resolved now. And realistically, I think the only thing that the government can do is junk the treaty and do without it, because the EU is simply not going to negotiate in good faith. And characters like Guy Verhofstadt and Jean-Claude Barnier, who was the chief negotiator for the Brexit deal, were caught on film admitting that they were using Ireland to weaken Britain. That's the kind of people these are, We've got idiots who think that these people are somehow, sort of sainted saviors of. It's terrible, really. But that, there is no negotiation. We've not been negotiating in good faith. They use people as weapons against other people to build their power and their dominance, and that's all they're interested in. But I mean, of course, what happened after the referendum, immediately after, is instead of delivering on the result like he promised, David Cameron immediately resigned as Prime Minister. You see, there's a process to leave the European Union called Article 50, which was supposed to be you would trigger it and then you've got 2 years to negotiate your exit terms and then you're out. So it was said, we will trigger Article 50 the day after a successful Leave vote. In order to not keep that promise, Cameron immediately resigned, forcing a leadership election, which saw Theresa May become the Conservative Prime Minister. Now, May was a Remainer, and her plan was not to try to stop Brexit overtly, obviously, but instead to negotiate an exit deal, which was basically as good as staying in, because it didn't really give us the freedoms and advantages we wanted to gain, so that it would be very easy for a future government to take us straight back in. And then in 2017, Theresa May had a very good go at losing the general election. She deliberately tried to throw it, because I can assure you, Lonnie, right, that no Conservative government serious about power ever would campaign on the basis of screwing the elderly for massive amounts of money. And that's exactly what Theresa May went into the election proposing. Quite horrific plans for stealing your money to pay for your care, basically, which would have taken out thousands and thousands of pounds from elderly persons' assets, and of course then meant they couldn't pass them on to their families.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how unpopular that was.
Yeah, we have a similar problem in the United States through some banking instruments for the elderly.
Yes. Well, despite this, she failed to lose it and only managed to cut her majority in half, which was a pretty slim majority. And of course, she was up against Jeremy Corbyn, who is very far left. I mean, I don't even think Bernie Sanders would cover it as a comparison for an American politician.
That guy
Who've got
very
hard
far.
left with Bernie Sanders?
Maybe AOC. Maybe AOC.
She liked Corbyn a lot, actually. Now, as I said, there was a left argument for Euroscepticism all along, right? In that, the EU was bad for workers, bad for unions, and Corbyn was a Eurosceptic for decades. But crucially, when it came to deciding the Labour Party position for the EU referendum, Corbyn brought the Labour Party out for Remain. He didn't bring the Labour Party out for Brexit. If he had brought the Labour Party out for Brexit, his electability would have gone up enormously, because the Conservative Party was all Remain and we didn't trust them, bunch of snakes. So all of those leftists today who are still crying about a Conservative government, if the Labour Party had backed Brexit in the referendum and maintained backing Brexit, there would have been a Labour government in 2017 with a good majority, which would only just be coming up for re-election. So if you want to complain about having a Tory government, you want to look at why the UK left abandoned its working class. Because if Corbyn had come out for leave, he would have got into power, and they would have had at least 5 years of Labour government by now. So I don't listen to all this crying about Boris Johnson and everything else, because it's their own stupid fault. Hey, there you go. That's how it is, But, despite it all, despite having to go to polls again and again and again to keep confirming we really did mean it, we want Brexit, thank you, and all the plots and plans, Theresa May's grand plan to keep us effectively in the EU and only to Brexit in name only, which I think was called Brino at one point, Brexit in name only. It's for the manic, insane Remainers in Parliament who wrecked it, because they were so wound up, right? And these people are so stupid, they can't think for themselves. They have to have orders, you see. So when they haven't got orders, they go off, they lose the plot. And these Remainers became so utterly deranged that they refused to vote for any kind of Brexit deal at all. Poor if they'd be endorsing Brexit. How are you going to have another referendum if you say yes to Brexit? You've got to reject Brexit. You've got to have another referendum. No. But if they'd have done what Theresa May wanted, if they'd have endorsed Theresa May's deal, it would have been extremely easy for a future Liberal Democrat or Labour Party government, or a future Conservative government for that matter, to reverse Brexit and take us back in, because Theresa May had a deal which was as close to staying in without being in as you could get. That was what she was promoting, but they refused to back her. And then what do we get? Oh, well, sorry, it's a bit of a harder Brexit now. We offered you a nice negotiated Brexit, but you wouldn't have it. and then the EU weren't going to offer that again because they obviously weren't going to succeed. The EU thought that plan would work. I mean, can you imagine being Guy Verhofstadt, tearing his goddamn hair out as those goddamn stupid British Remain MPs wreck his plan? He thought, and again he's on tape, right? He thought that Theresa May's deal was so much to his advantage that he said, we've turned Britain into a colony. That's how bad May's plan was.
Oh.
That's how bad May's plan was. But it was Remainers who wrecked it. That's how self-destructive these morons are. Because they're ignorant, they don't understand the forces they're dealing with, they don't understand the political picture, they don't understand who their real enemies are. And then they lose. And they lose again. And they lose again. And they lose again. And they lose again. Well, oh well. You can't get quality opponents these days, Lonnie, honestly.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Well, look, I hope I've given you more of an understanding of Brexit and what it was and how hard we had to fight for it and how hard we still fight for it and how we'll never let it go.
So where's it stand right now?
Oh, well, we're done. We're not in the EU. So Brexit was achieved with the election of Boris Johnson at the end of 2019 was the final, we really mean it this time, and then we actually left the EU 1st of January 2020.
Gotcha.
So Brexit is complete. No, I understand your confusion, right? Because there's still people pretending it hasn't happened, right? Yeah. So, I mean, all you have to understand, if you do a Twitter search and just type in hashtag FBPE, pretty much every tweet you'll see is from somebody deranged. In one way or another, detached from reality. Vast majority. I tell you what.
We have gone to 2 hours.
Well, okay, well, we are winding up, I think. But in all of the debates that I had, in all of the work that I did Brexit, and we're talking 7 years of solid campaigning, Brian, and especially escalating and ramping up in the last 2. In all of that time, the only opponents I respected were not even British.
What?
Well, I got into debating EU patriots who were French and German.
Ah, okay.
And these guys were completely on the ball. They knew exactly what the real situation was. They had no shame in admitting it. And they're going, look, it's fine by us because we believe in the European superstate. And you know what? I'm going, hey, boys, that's fine by me. I completely respect you. And they completely respect me. And it was very much let the best man win. And hey, I don't control how people vote. I only do my best, But they were the only people that I respected as debating opponents because they were the only people who weren't self-deceptive.
Gotcha.
And we're still driven by this self-deception today, and they'll go on about, oh, we're worse off. And it's just like I said to that woman on the street. Nobody knows the future. Right? I mean, right now, Western currencies have had a big hit over the past week because it's coming into winter and this war in Ukraine is still going on and the energy prices are spiking and Europe's got huge problems, right? So the cost of doing business in Europe is going up dramatically and the smart money is pulling out. It's pulling out to the only place it can go that isn't China, otherwise known as the United States of America, right? But I don't kid myself. Your economy is like teetering on the absolute edge.
It is on the brink.
The amount of debt that you guys have got, I mean, our debt is much more manageable in comparison, honestly. And if America falls over, the whole world currency system falls over.
I do not understand why
the value of a pound would certainly take a knock. You can't. America is the backstop to the global financial system.
Do you know that the pound this week is $1.09?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
I mean, there was one point in the 1970s where it was £3 to a buck.
Yes. Yes. I used to buy Starlog magazine from UK
Oh, great
at the
magazine.
gas station, and it was twice as much here, or I mean, in American dollars than British pounds, and that was something I grew up just accepting.
So yeah, we've had big differences between our currencies in the past.
Hmm.
I don't think 109 is anything to worry about. I mean, it's not exactly saying the American dollar's got a massive advantage, is it? You know,
Well,
if it was
after
like
this
five
winter,
pounds,
things are going to be
yeah,
in play, really.
yeah. So but our current generation are just not trained to think. We're certainly not trained to not panic. We're not trained to just sit down for 48 hours and see what happens before you overreact.
Right.
So, if we run around like headless chickens and react to everything. Look, these same people, right, crying about the pound taking a little bit of a knock this week are the same people who, for years, have been going, oh, I hope the pound completely collapses and that Brexit's a total failure. It's all right when it suits them, but as soon as they think it's going to hit them in their bottom line, out comes a panic. Just like your lot in Martha's Vineyard, just because 50 migrants didn't turn up on a bus. That was epic, Charlie. I must admit.
Oh, if I lived in Florida, I would have to really, really high five my governor.
Well, look, people whine about it. Oh, it's human trafficking. Oh, for God's sake, it was just asking the most privileged people in America to put up with a tiny fragment of what they've been imposing, especially on
Yeah.
the southern states, for
They,
years, and
they
it
said
showed
they're a
them up
sanctuary
as
state.
the racist, intolerant, bigoted hypocrites that they really are. And I could see that from 4,000 miles away.
my personal favorite had to be
Suddenly,
the
Mr.
phone call.
Obama's property not open to campers, No
So
room at the inn.
right after they shipped the so-called immigrants out, they ran an ad in the paper. We've got 50 jobs we can't get filled because we don't have enough people.
I'm surprised. I'm not surprised they're not putting up a 30-foot fence, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. They want a fence now. We can't have one.
Ironically, I understand Mr. Biden is still building that border wall. Is that true? I've heard that's true. That's still getting built. We haven't really cancelled it at all. We've just shut up about it because it's all right when we do it.
If it's being done, it's being done so quietly. I haven't seen any video evidence of it.
I'll try and dig out what I was reading a week or two ago and send it to you. Remind me to have a look for it.
Please
But
do.
I
Please do.
definitely heard that wall is still going up.
I will do my best to get pictures.
Anyway, here we are, 2 hours in. So
Yes.
I probably need to put a bow on this. But how has that been? I hope you've enjoyed this talk.
I have personally enjoyed it. I think that people will dip into this and appreciate it greatly. My guest today has once again been John White. I hope that you have benefited from John visiting with us from the UK, explaining what happened that brought Brexit about and the internal gyrations of how it came to pass.
And the
6
glorious
pounds.
beauty of our victory.
Fantastic victory. Um,
Honestly, I
and
took 6 weeks off, right? And then I thought, oh, you boys need some help. So I came over to help you lot with Mr. Trump. And I stuck around for 4 years. So, but then I had American patriot friends who came and helped us with Brexit campaigning too.
Hey, we're going to need your help again in a couple of years.
We social conservative patriots world over must stick together.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Because the enemy certainly stuck together like glue.
I was born a Kennedy Democrat. The only difference between me and them was I had a different opinion on abortion, and it was mine and personal.
Mhm.
But now I'm some kind of far right nut job.
Well, today's Democrats aren't yesterday's Democrats, are they?
No, they're not.
And you know what? The first political party I was ever involved with when I was 18 was the Green Party. But
Really?
the Green Party then, vastly different to the Green Party now, because back then it was about actual conservatism. I mean, as in conservation, as in
Conservationism.
ecology,
Yeah.
as in it wasn't about climate change and global warming, right? It was about stop polluting the rivers, stop polluting the air, stop being wasteful with our resources. We need to be efficient.
Indeed.
It was about good management, good practice, and it was very respectable politics on the whole.
Mhm.
But what happened was, in the early 90s, they sold out to the UN for power. Well,
Really?
the UN put key Greens into key positions, you see, and
Oh,
gave them power in return for them abandoning a more conservative form of greenism to turn into the sort of radical greenism that it is now. And of course, anybody who stood for the original ecology, environmentalist green concept was drummed out and thrown out. So I learned a lot about politics as a young man, watching all that unfold in front of my eyes. But that was actually the first political party I involved myself in, was the Green Party, because to me, looking after the world made sense, and it still does. But what I have discovered over time is that planned economies do not create environmental solutions, and
no.
that our environmental solutions can only come from applied technology. So that means that it's actually capitalism, which, as much as it does
Absolutely.
harm the planet, is also doing the most to help it. And look at the societies which are the most polluting. Oh, the Chinese and the Russians. Are they
That's,
capitalist societies? No, they're crony societies at best.
yeah,
And for all of its faults, and it is an imperfect world,
it is.
unless we are to accept a scenario where the human race dies off to a fraction of our current population, it's only applied technology which will solve our problems. And I'm very much in tune with Mr. Elon Musk on that. I think he's got his head very much switched on. So he's an American I'm quite fond of.
Indeed. And after what, 6 Artemis failures? Three? Three major Artemis failures. Uh, Mr. Musk put the DART in space for this week's collision.
Mm-hmm.
So good for him.
Look, if you don't succeed, try and try again, and but sometimes that's just what you got to do, but oh my god, that technology, I could never have imagined as a child that you could bring a rocket back down to Earth and land it exactly where it took off from, fuel it back up and send it up again.
It's Johnny Quest, Space Ghost.
Amazing advances, and none of it's come through government money.
Not a bit. Well,
wow, yes and no. Well,
yeah,
the contracts have, because of course they can't exactly get NASA to send it up now, can they?
no,
what do you mean?
no.
What's that knackered old space shuttle you're still screwing the public vast amounts of taxes, claiming that that's how much it costs to maintain? You dirty scammers! Well, don't get back with Elon Musk. So
Well, where do you think he got the scientists from?
he's actually taking the human race forwards. I
He is.
respect that a great deal.
He
Right, okay, that's it. We've not done
Yes.
anything to Musk. It's been brilliant. I'm very happy for the opportunity to come and have this chat. And I mean, because we don't really talk about Brexit like this anymore in our country. It's all moved on. And as I say, it is over. It is the past. And apart from those whiners who just can't get it and keep crying about it, it is all over.
Yeah.
And the only way forward is forward.
And you have to keep the past alive.
A lot of people do understand that. So, this is many way a historical discussion, but it's just, I knew you'd be interested, and it's been great to have a chat. And I'd be very to see what feedback comes from this. So, as usual, people can find me, John the White One, on Twitter. and you can talk about anything you like. So if you know where to get me. And it's been marvelous. Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming on, and it's been an education. I am on comics at Lonnie Webb on Twitter and various other places. If you have a place and you can't find me, I think we should talk. And that being said, tomorrow I am going to try to get a review up of some indie comics. And doggone it, I can't remember the name of the one I've got lined up.
Captain Britain, maybe.
Maybe.
All right. Captain Brexit.
Captain Brexit.
Sounds quite good to me. All right.
Yes,
God bless, Lonnie. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I will talk to the rest of you when I can. Bye-bye now.